Hi, welcome on to the garden today, and to a face, if you don't know him, you need to know him, and I'm sure most of you do know him. This is Andre from Astrology Alerts, and he is a brilliant, quick reader. He does the one thing I think astrologers need to learn is brevity. He's very good at that. And he does a lot of really interesting politics. You know, I normally don't do that here, and we're not going to do that today. What I'd like to talk to Andre about was about what a person needs to know if they're going to come get a personal reading. I mean, what can you expect from a personal reading?
Well, the answer to that would be it would depend on the astrologer, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Different astrologers take different approaches. And for example, if you get a Vedic reading, Vedic astrology, not every time, but it's there, the probability increases that the reading takes on more of a fated quality, or a here's where you are, this is what's going to happen to you. And Western astrologers generally, but not always, generally tend to be more psychological in their approach and bring in more of that. You could say that the way I do it is very, very Western, in that I approach astrology as a language that can point to possibilities in your life. And it's not just because I'm a positive thinker, it's because it's true. You know, I've spent a long time studying this, and the great joy in astrology is when you discover that you have this chart and that the planets are functioning at the level you allow them to function, or that you're able to make them function, you know, through your knowledge, through your wisdom, through your understanding. And so then the greatest joy is when you realize, oh yes, that planet used to be this way for me, but now it's producing this other result because I've grown wiser and I'm you know, channeling that energy better. So that's the approach I take when I'm reading any chart. Is we'll assess where the person is, how it's working for them, and then look for solutions, and especially strategically, what's coming up and what's the best way you can do this. What are tactics? What are strategies? What are things you can do? And I'm convinced that this is, you know, the best approach. It's also the most logical, you know, and then people can argue about it, and they can say things like, no, if you have this planet and the other planet, you're doomed to whatever. I'm not buying that. You know, I'm convinced that it's a matrix of possibilities.
Yeah, and in Tarot, they have a thing where some cards relate to certain signs or planets and things, and I'll get people and they'll go, oh, there's going to be Pisces all over my reading because there's Pisces all over my chart, and I'm going, and what does that mean to you? And then undoubtedly they've tied a lot of assumptions to that, which may or may not be true, and they get clinging to that. I like your approach. That's one of the things I like about watching you do your readings, is that you're quick, you don't overanalyze, you don't overthink something, and you just sort of present it that way, and that makes sense. Because I like to teach, I like to talk to people and read and say, well, they could do this, but guess what? They made this, when you're looking at the politicians, but they made this decision to go this direction. And it's obviously free will. And I want people to understand that's what we're here, critters here doing.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, one thing with what you mentioned with my approach is that part of it is more than brevity is preparation, or, you know, the idea that, I mean, I learned that in college when one time I wrote an essay that was, I usually write pretty well, but the teacher was really upset because she said, why are you, you know, this is too complicated to say what you mean. So then I realized it's much easier to state a point clearly and, you know, get to the point. But it may take a little bit more work sometimes to create the case, let's say. And then, you know, the person reading it, of course, gets the result of your preparation.
That's right. And I think that's important. Yeah. Do you, I know just enough astrology to be dangerous. I studied at a free university when I was in college. And I remember the one thing I remember from that class was the professor said, you guys, because I was 19 at the time, he said, you'll live to see this. I won't. But he was talking about when Jupiter and Saturn met in Aquarius and we switched paradigms from earth to air. And I remember him talking about that, and that kind of intrigued me. I like the larger general overall view of astrology from that perspective, those sorts of big cyclical meanings. And the night that happened, I put my shoes on and went out and walked to a golf course near me and stood in the middle of it and watched it and thought, I was told about this when I was 19 and we're moving to a whole new place. And this feels real. At that point, it felt really good to be moving to a really new place. And I studied it formally, but I did it old school before they had computers. And I didn't like ephemeris that much.
Well, that's good, because that actually, in my case, is the other way around. I was doing it too when there were no computers, but my progress, or my fairly rapid, was because I love the ephemeris, in the sense that I would look at the pages and just in my memory go back and try to gauge, well, what was I doing? What was happening? And the ephemeris is like all these numbers that seem, they're numbers, but the logic is they're showing you orbits, they're actual planets as they move, and you have to get into that kind of imagineering. Well, how is this thing more slow and so forth? And so for me, the ephemeris is like a tool for imagination. And I still use it that way, although now I'm so into it that, and have been for so many years, I know where they are. So I can mentally, the ephemeris is in my mind. So
see, to me, the ephemeris was like this giant train schedule, and I never knew what train to get on.
No, it's true. I mean, one thing about astrology, if you are going to be good at it, in my opinion, you've got to like the numbers, because the thing that people like to do is they go, the possibilities, I think this is cool. But then they get into the story before they measure. And astrology is measuring. You've got to measure, and then you build a story. And so if you get intimidated by sun is at 17 degrees or whatever it is, well, how are you going to know when Saturn is contacting that sun? You know it by the number, right? You look at the ephemeris and you go, I know that number. That's the same number as my so-and-so. And then you link them up. So you have to like numbers at least a little bit.
Yeah. And the other thing, I build crystal grids, and I use a lot of sacred geometry when I'm building them. And people don't understand a square, a trine, and what the different energies are, but they're in my grids. And it became easier for me to understand that because of what I'd studied in astrology. But could you just, maybe I'm wrong, but oppositions push you forward. They give you attention, because if we lived in a tensionless world where everything just trined along, we'd never get anywhere. We need the squares and we need the oppositions, because when people hear those terms, they think geometry and they go, I don't want to hear about that.
No, actually, it's critical. Yeah, you could even say that astrology is based on simple numbers, and you can go further and even make statements that may seem grandiose or invented. But I'm convinced that you could call the software of the universe is based on the principle of numbers. And so you've probably come across on YouTube, I've seen this, where they talk about 369 and something to do with Tesla and magic of 369. It's because the threes, triangles, and multiples of triangles are the most stable geometric figures. And in fact, at first I thought, well, then why aren't we building, everything should be like building like pyramids, build homes and pyramids. Well, that's not terribly practical. But my contractor pointed out, the houses are built using triangles, because if you look in the walls, you see a lot of X's, and that's what keeps things stable, right? So in the chart, similarly, 369, the trine, the sextile, and the nobile is a ninth of the circle. That's when the energy flows very naturally and has a natural stability. But then you always have to look at the other side of the coin, which would be that energy like that is more static, it's settled, it's not going to move and grow. It just enjoys and connects directly. You need the opposition to the square 4 or the half square 8. That series, 2, 4, 8, any multiple of that is irritating, but it's dynamic and it's growth producing. And the irony is that when you look at people's charts, they tend to be more known in terms of fame and reputation and influence through their squares, not through their trines. Their trines help them to put the energy out, but it's because they had to fight with the square. It'll be some problem they're researching, they're puzzled by, and they work and work and work and work, or a genuine impediment that they have to overcome. And that's what brings their fame. And so then as soon as you realize that, you realize when I'm being challenged in squares, yes, it is harder, but I'm growing, I'm developing. Something is happening here that both increases my energy and my fortunes in the near term, but even in the longer term as well. That's what becomes the basis of progress. So both are needed, basically. Yes.
Yeah, and they're in everybody's chart, because I have one friend who said all I have is fire, and I think she's got fire in one ear, she thinks, and I said no, that those planets are moving around all the time, and you have transits that are presenting you with all the other possibilities.
Exactly.
You know, I've noticed a lot of leaders tend to have a stellium, which is more than 3 or 4 planets in a tight configuration, and that means that the good opportunities and the bad opportunities all sort of pile up on them,
Exactly.
and they force them
to, that's exactly it. I mean, if you have a stellium is like a group of planets that are parked in a certain spot, well, then you know that there will be periods when that stellium is getting easy flowing energy, and periods when it's not the case. And just knowing which is which, getting more skillful at navigating through those periods. And clearly when you're younger, it's more difficult than when you gain wisdom. Generally, there are people that can do it at a younger age. For the most part, things get better as you gain wisdom and experience. And yes, it's true what you say about leaders, and it's also true that you'll see high achieving people with things like grand crosses, which if you start doing your open, go to the occult shop or go online, whatever, read a book, and they'll tell you, oh, this isn't good. Look at this, square that. That's a very shallow way to interpret it, because what is really happening is the person has a grand cross, they have the potential to really reach great heights through the energy that it provides. It is true that, yes, it's also true, you'll find people like that might be very misaligned and get depressed, and they're caving into the challenge of the energy, and then they suffer, right? And this is where, for example, the probably the most key planet, Saturn, which I often think is the ruler of life on Earth, because it rules anything that crystallizes, and since we have a body, that's like a crystallization, right? But that planet rules because it's a reducing, contracting energy. It's how you get work done. Work is a focus, a contraction, right? But think about it, if you don't find what to work on, if you don't develop that skill, contraction will turn into depression, because that's what depression is. It's concave energy. So a person with too much Saturn, a lot of Saturn, whatever, could have depression problems. But their life is about finding a way around that somehow, discovering the kind of work that can allow them to transcend their depression, which could even be the study of depression itself, and then you become a teacher of depression.
That's right.
Because they have a really thick Saturn that forced them into it, so to speak.
Well, you should know you're talking to a person whose Saturn's been squaring her sun, and my son has been partnered up with Uranus. So this has been a fun year.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, there you go. Okay. My condolences. Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. I mean, no doubt about it. I've been at this a long, long time, and I'll admit that, yeah, I prefer Jupiter on my sun to Saturn square my sun. Absolutely. Even Saturn conjunct my sun. It's difficult. Saturn is difficult. No question about it.
Yeah, I had my knees replaced on the day that Saturn was exactly opposite my natal sun. I didn't know that I did that day, because I was not paying attention to my chart. But
yeah, well, that's an interesting one, because that is a really accurate correlation. Saturn is connected to joints and knees very specifically. The only thing would have been that it probably would have been better not to do it right on the opposition, because Saturn is a planet that is best not to tempt. In that the counsel is, if you're going to do dental work, Saturn, knees, back, joints, better to at least, if it's in the Saturn period, try to get a couple of degrees away. Don't have it too close to the planet, because what can happen is more, fallout, or more longer recovery, or something that doesn't quite go well, just because Saturn is that way.
Mine healed just fine. And and then when I look back, I went, whoop, missed that one. Anyway, your sister's also works in astrology, but differently, right?
I have three sisters, and two of them are astrologers.
B? I'm
Bea.
sorry.
Bea, yeah, no, she
Bea.
always says to
Okay.
people, tell them not to call me Bea. It's Bea.
Okay, Bea. Okay.
Yeah, Bea. She's an astrologer, and she's a Jungian analyst. You know, someone who studies the Jungian teachings, and so she brings in a lot of mythology into the astrology, which is really valid, because I noticed that planets behave in amazingly mythological ways, which I think is funny, because scientists can often be so dismissive of astrology, and then it is they that pick the names for these planets, and they always pick the right one through the synchronicity.
Yeah, I know.
It is hilarious. The story of the discovery of Pluto is like, I swear, it's like watching an SNL skit, and how revealing it is that there are these amazing synchronicities: who proposed the name, the timing of it all, you know, the transit she was under, that it's Pluto, that it's exactly what Pluto is. Because, you know, if you name something and then it behaves just like that character and the mythological scheme, you wonder, well, what's going on here? That's the amazing synchronicity of things, let's say, right? But in a way, to someone who's familiar with that, great, I understand that, I accept it. To a scientist, it's almost insulting, because they'll say, you're making the whole thing up. You know,
That's too simple. That's too simple.
Too simple. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, and then the other sister is not so much as directly into the myths, but she also, they both started doing astrology right around the same time as me, so they're very familiar, you know. With
Well, I saw your interview with her and with Bea. It's on Andre's channel, and I'll have that listed below so you can link to it. Very interesting. It amused me because I was the kid in high school who had the World Dictionary of Mythology, that big fat book, sitting next to my bed. And that was my light nighttime reading of not just the Greeks and the Romans, but all the other gods. And so I've always, that was another reason I was fascinated with astrology. Plus, I wanted to be an astronomer until I found out to do astronomy, you have to be really good in math. And I was not really good at math.
Yeah, well, math. Yeah, the math part can be difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, if you're trained well, it's good. But I went to a school district that 2 + 2 = 6. Oh, no, not really. So you do readings for individuals. I mean, I know we see your public work, but
We do.
you know, we kind of went over it. But if I was someone coming to you, should I come to you with the load of questions? Should I just come to you and say, tell me what's there? How would I approach that? Or is it just whatever I want to do?
Well, yeah, it's in a way whatever you want to do, but the approach I take, it's basically the idea of, okay, where are you at? What's happening in your life right now? You know, the best way to illustrate this is that if you do enough astrology, you'll run into twins, and they'll have the exact same chart, but their lives are not unfolding in the same way. And that should make you wonder. That's a way a scientist will try to append it and say, see, can't work. Obviously, right? Different lives. And it's because each twin will always take a different part of the chart and express it more than the other. It's just the nature of life. And then they get a different fate as a result. Literally, different things start to happen. They will share a whole lot because their transits are still the same. And so if they're both getting Saturn, they both get the pressure of Saturn, but it'll show up in different ways, right? So the idea is that the way I do a chart is, what are you trying to manifest in your life right now? What is it that you're trying to do? And I might ask you, okay, what just happened? I try to calibrate it by different things in the last few years and so forth. But then the idea is to provide the guidance to, you know, set the compass to go in that direction in the upcoming years. That's the way I read a chart. In other words, to maximize that potential in a person and provide insight.
Okay, we're talking about this life now. But can you see past lives in charts?
You know, it's not so much that I see the past life. You see the past pattern, like past lives. The reason I don't like talking like that is it makes it too much into an ego thing. You know, people create these personages, you know, the myth of Joe, the myth of Mary, and I used to be in this life and the other life. I prefer to look at it as you're like a karmic stream, right? You're this thing that is moving in time. And yeah, you may have had 50 lives. Well, you're here now. And the task is to resolve that stream, that karmic flow, and make it as good as possible now. This idea that, in the Vedic religion, they say, well, you've got this karma and you'll have to reincarnate to fix the karma. But logic would tell you, well, how many times? How does that work? Isn't the logic to begin to work on it immediately? Begin to do it now, right?
If I see signs, what do I do?
Exactly. So then the karma would be, okay, the karma is in your planets. It's there, the problems, the talents, and so on. So then the idea is, okay, what do I do to connect to the energy as it is today, resolve my hangups from before, and move into a more prosperous, more enlightened, happier future. It's in a way common sense.
Yeah, because in my world, we do past life readings of sorts, and I always worry that someone's going to use the past life as an excuse to do nothing now. And I don't like that. The other thing, when you're talking about how your ego creates this other personality, in the 70s and 80s, when I worked a lot of psychic fairs, every reader had their guides and their, these, and I never knew who mine was. And people used to say, oh, they were always an Indian chief or a pharaoh's daughter or something, and I'm like, there are a lot of other people in the world that could have contributed all this, And finally, at a past life conference with Brian Weiss, he did a thing to meet your guide, and I met my guide, and she's Addie, and she's absolutely delightful. I was 69, and I said, were you pissed because I never came looking for you or wanted to talk to you? She said, no, it's okay. You did everything I told you to do, so it was fine.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just the thing that sometimes with a lot of this it's a question of language and how you put it. I'm not aware of any guides as, some kind of personage that guides me, but I know what it's like to intuit and get a sense that I'm plugged in and that some energy is coming through or is being revealed. How you say that, depends on the person's temperament, let's say, right? And but if I one of the things I'll say is I'm always open to changing my mind from one day to the next. And maybe next week I'll tell you, now, definitely, I met my, if there are two of them or there are three. So far, it hasn't happened. So far, it's been more of a direct intuition versus feeling like the channel is closed and, nothing is coming through.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good way to handle it, because we were talking a little bit earlier about how astrologers always know what time it is, what date it was. I mean, you guys are good at keeping logs. I mean, it's what you do. And one of the things that when I started my work, before the world stopped with COVID or anything else, I built a crystal grid. I wanted to try one out. So I built my own. And I said, I want prosperity. I want a fun thing to come into my life. And I had a bunch of other friends on it. And the next day I got an email from a astrologer, and she told me that because I'd commented on something she'd done, that I was winning a free reading. So we set up, and I knew enough astrology that she ended up doing a progress chart, which is another interesting thing I will ask you about. But when she did my chart and we talked, I said, well, I know you're an astrologer and you always write things down. You guys are always pretty prompt. So, and she wrote it down and she said, oh yeah, I pulled it at this date at this time. And it was 45 minutes after I'd finished my grid, which kind of gave me a synchronicity. That's why I like astrology. It gave me a synchronicity that what I was building was a valid idea, and it kind of grew from there. But she did a progress chart. Can you explain to people what a progress chart is?
Right. So a way to explain it is to contrast it with what I call transits. So your natal chart is like a snapshot at the moment of birth, and the planets are placed in a certain spot. And you then might think, oh, well, they're there at that moment, but then they're always moving. Everything in the universe is in constant motion. So the way transits work is that you take that picture and you compare it to where they are today, and you look at what they're doing today to that initial snapshot by using the angles we talked about. Okay, so at this point, there was an internet freeze. So I'm going to try to explain where I was going with this. It's the matter of progressions, which in contrast to what are known as transits, progressions are based on looking at the days after your birth. And the logic is that a day after your birth corresponds to a year after your birth in terms of the progressed development. And so if you look a day, it's 1 year. If you look 10 days, 10 years, 30 days, 30 years, and so on. Now, this may seem like a convenient but fake abstraction. It is not. It works remarkably well, and you can experience this by following a single planet, namely the moon, in its progressed movement. Because if you think about it, the moon has to travel about 12, 13 degrees in a single day, which means that you can see quite a bit of change in the progressed position every single year, and you'll notice that it corresponds remarkably well with something that is going on in the person's life. 10 days after your birth, then it corresponds to 10 years after your birth.
Okay.
And it may seem like a facile, invented correlation, but it's actually very accurate, probably because you're taking one circle and making it into a bigger circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's remarkably accurate that, for example, if you look 30 years after your birth, you'd say, well, okay, that would be the sun 30 days later. So that's the progressed sun. But the moon has gone around the entire, in 30 days, it goes around the entire loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you start to think, well, really? I mean, would the moon 30 days later have anything to do with me? Well, it's remarkable, but it does. You look at that moon and you point it back at the natal positions, and you see, you feel. I mean, one of the things I'll tell you about astrology is that for me, what it's been is an inner language, in that almost all my knowledge comes from feeling the planets. I constantly track where they are and how they're feeling. That's how I know how Mars feels, how Saturn feels, rather than looking and saying, well, Saturn must be this way because Joe Biden is experiencing such and such. I prefer the organic energy first, right? So yes, I'll feel progressions, definitely the transits, and both give you really good information. In fact, the progressed chart, you can even go further, and you can look at your progressed chart all by itself as your evolved self, right, at a certain age. And I notice that even the transit positions pointing to that chart have effect as well, right? It's as though your evolved self is getting today's alignment,
Right,
and getting a certain effect. And so the thing then, of course, someone who's listening to all this will say, oh my God, my head is going to explode. You're talking about so many charts. All I can tell you is that the more you practice, the easier it is to hold on, look at 7 different things. And this is where your intuition, then you see,
right.
your intuition guides you into say, no, this is where the real energy is for this person versus some other thing. Otherwise, your head will blow up with too much data. You'll have transits, progressions, and too much.
I got a good chart, and I knew my birth time, and I followed it, and I exactly that the ascendant that I have is right. And I don't follow a ton of planets. I don't follow every little time something moves, but big things come, I want to know. And I know you know about the astrology of pandemics, which shows how when the big planets move around over time, and it's over centuries, and you can see it over a long period of time. And I'm a history buff too, and I love that. And there was the changing of the gods, which was just done, where it was just it was just Pluto and Uranus that they followed, and they went through the grand changes that happened at certain points. And I think if you look at that, then you can start to say, well, maybe that's something I should watch. And I think if you use your intuition, you're going to find the thing you should watch.
Yeah, no, and what you just said is totally correct. The astrology of pandemics, I actually had no real knowledge of that. Pandemics happen so infrequently. I had zero interest in it. And I only learned after the pandemic started. This man put together this video called The Astrology of Pandemics. I actually ran it on my channel to help him promote it, just because I thought it was really well done. He showed the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunction although going back to all the way to Justinian times, the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto don't necessarily have to be conjunct. They can be square, they can be opposed, but they're doing some dance with each other and it tends to lead to a pandemic. He also said in that video, which I found it remarkable. Okay, so at this point in the discussion, there was an internet outage, a freeze. So I'll try to finish that thought. And what I was about to say before the freeze is that in the video named The Astrology of Pandemics, it is stated that the pandemic would be ending in May of 2021. And keep in mind, this video was created, put out there, so to speak, in 2020. So this was looking ahead at the time. Now, May of 2021 was not the end of the pandemic unless you focus on the fact that that is in fact when vaccines came online, and it was when Jupiter was entering Pisces. That was the reason the creator of the video was saying this would happen. And the pandemic, in a sense, did end for many people at that point, given that they had added protection. Of course, in the US, many people were not taking vaccines, and so what happened is that in May of 2021, almost to the day, when Jupiter enters Pisces, Biden announces that the pandemic is over, which is obviously not true, because by August, which is when Jupiter retrograded into Aquarius, they had to implement restrictions again because the cases were rising, etc. And this continued all the way through the fall and until late in 2021, when Jupiter re-entered Pisces, which was in fact when Omicron came on the scene. At first, there was a great deal of worry about Omicron because of the tremendous transmissibility, but very soon it was discovered that it is a lot more transmissible, but a lot less lethal. And this is the second leap into the end of the pandemic, so to speak. And the whole picture would be that Jupiter in Pisces means that now we have the three planets that were responsible for the pandemic on an astrological level: Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, when they were together in Capricorn. Jupiter entering Pisces for good means that it's in Pisces, Saturn is in Aquarius, and Pluto is in Capricorn. They're now effectively separated by sign. And so this is likely to continue in this way, and people will ask from time to time, when is the COVID pandemic going to end? Effectively speaking, it has ended. It's just that to the extent that a person doesn't want to get vaccinated, then they're exposed to greater risk of catching COVID. But it's also known that by this stage, the Omicron variant is far more dominant, if not completely dominant, which means by the Omicron stage, it is effectively more like a flu in terms of its danger than it is like a scary type of disease that could kill you due to its intensity. Okay, so on the other side of the internet freeze, I was talking about the cycle of Neptune, specifically Neptune going through Pisces, which it does from 2011 to 2026. A lot of the misinformation, disinformation, truth and lies and all this, that's, to my understanding, Neptune and Pisces. Neptune enters Pisces in 2011. It's going to be in Pisces for another couple of years. It's going to finally go into Aries. And on the one hand, there has been an explosion of wonderful mystical information in the media. You can go on YouTube and find all kinds of stuff that I used to have to dig in the occult shop in the corner somewhere, if I was lucky, if they had the book. Mm-hmm. Now a lot of it is online in videos in different ways. YouTube is great for that. But on the other hand, you have QAnon, in the same
Mhm.
platform trying to spread insanity, things that are senseless, made up. The idea of fake. Neptune rules. This is where it gets interesting. On the high end, Neptune is the most spiritual planet. It's the mystical and the mysterious and the other world. On the low end, it's the biggest liar, deceiver, scoundrel. It's the energy of trickery, fake, right? Fake energy. And you know this, by the way, because Neptune, these planets reflect what humanity was doing when they were being discovered. So that's why Pluto rules nuclear power, because that's when nuclear power came online in the 1930s. When Neptune was being discovered was when they were starting to make recordings. Recordings are the replica of something. It's not the thing itself. It's a replica. It's useful, but if you start to create fakes, things that aren't real, then you get into another problem, which is, an entirely different thing, and it's not good.
Well, you may not be old enough to remember the old line. Is it real or is it Memorex?
Yeah, well, there you go, right? But it's that realm, right? And even when you're looking at a film, you're not looking at the real thing. You're looking at something that is spliced together to create an effect in your neurons. The phosphorus causes your nervous system to react. And yet it can be incredibly useful, right? Because if you present something that a person can use in some way, or you could even argue when you're watching a film, if it does something to your emotions in some way that is, positive or interesting, because maybe a person could say, no, I don't want to have good emotions. I want to watch a horror film because I want to have all my demons, aroused or whatever. Fine. I mean, it's your choice, but that's what's happening. It's the fake medium, entering into the so-called real medium.
Well, that was a job I had at one point too. Before I read cards and before I worked in politics, I had a degree in broadcast film. I used to edit movies and work with that kind of stuff. And it's true. And it frustrates. That's one thing that frustrates the crap out of me is people don't understand. It's what the cameraman points his lens at is what you're going to know. And if they're not being fair presenters, and they're not, because they're another human being with their own ego and their own problems, you're going to see what they want you to see. And I actually, the first year out of college, I taught media to 2 private schools for some very privileged children that had cameras that they could aim at things. But some of the kids did great movies, but they all understood by the end of the year, it depends on what I pointed at. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing that there you're getting into the realm of awareness where you're abstracting, you're getting into meta models. And this is how you really grow, is to understand, well, what's really happening here, get a sense of what it really is in reality. And then in astrology, you try to correlate. Astrology is like a massive categorization language. You try to ask, what rules that? What is it that gets connected to that planet? And then slowly but surely, you gather more and more wisdom as a result, by accurately pointing to what the planet is actually doing in whatever domain.
Well, and you do that brilliantly with your short presentations. And I think I look upon your presentations when I watch them as a sort of master class in putting the images together. And I really, really enjoy it. And I have friends that I said, go get your own personal chart, go get a good one. And I gave them some sites where they could go do them because I don't do them. And then I said, and then take a picture of it, carry it in your phone. So if you happen to hear somebody say, oh, but this is coming in at this degree of this, then go just look and just see if you start to see the correlations. Then it's not some giant class you had to take, and it's not some big book you had to look at. Just find out how those pieces work in your own life.
Okay, here is another brief internet freeze, after which we continued the discussion.
You froze.
You froze. I don't know who froze.
Okay, we both froze. So everybody, nobody missed anything because we were both frozen. But
that was the meditation moment. That's the part where you stop.
That's where you think, wasn't that profound?
Yeah, you stop. Yeah, that's the moment when you drop all the analysis and you're just with yourself, because that's actually the place of intuition. The irony to all this is that if you do a lot of mental work, at some point the mind itself realizes, this is really great, but the real truth is behind all this. The real truth is not this. And so then you go into the simplicity of just being, which, for example, I remember studying this great spiritual teacher. He actually called it the wisdom of ignorance, or the idea of literally dropping out of all the analysis, because that actually keeps you on a, kind of a really interesting plane. But the true juice is underneath that. So without realizing it, I think we just did that.
We did it, and maybe that's good. Anyway, we're not going to do any more analysis paralysis because I couldn't be more delighted to have met you and to have brought you into my audience. And I will put in the notes below how to find his channel if you're so unaware that you haven't found him yet. And I look forward to seeing you. And I really do enjoy your readings. And I think you have the perspective. If I could have stood the books, I would have liked to have had in astrology. But
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Anyway, you have a good day. Bye-bye.